The American Adoption Congress 13th International Conference, April 11th to the 14th, 1991, Garden Grove, California. This is program number D151, tape 29A.
Well, my name is Marty Smith, and I'm a birth mother. Last year, I was absolutely sure that I had nothing of significance to contribute to this conference. I was real sure of that. My friends encouraged me to put together an outline anyway and send it in, and I think I did that because I thought probably it wouldn't be accepted until I was safe. And then it was accepted, and then I got real scared. And I think it was at that moment that I realized that my feeling of inadequacy about being able to do this workshop was another one of the deep wounds that was created by my experience as a birth mother and as an oppressed woman. So we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And with me today is Valerie Manticon, who's a reunited birth mother and a feminist family therapist in Orange County, and Kendra Wallace, who's an adoptee who has searched and located her birth mother and has yet not been reunited, and Dr. Betty Brooks, who's an educator working with pregnant minors in the public school system. Each of us will share a little bit of our personal views and experiences of patriarchy's influence on adoption. And I get to go first, because it's mine. I was ashamed, I think, to be aligned with or to call myself a feminist or even be associated with the women's movement. Why would I want to align myself with the very people whose advice created all my pain? My mother, the social workers, the women at the maternity home where I was sent to stay. Even my doctor was a woman. I don't think I understood all of that until I was reading Carol Schaefer's book last summer. A few of us in our group were lucky enough to get a galley proof of it before it was released and published, and we took turns staying up all night because I think that's what each of us did when we read it. And there were two paragraphs in that book that just clarified it all for me, and I want to share those with you. Still chasing after a nameless discontent, I eventually considered resuming therapy. I still felt at odds with the world that worshipped a sweeter, more passive, servile female. The 60s and 70s had brought all sorts of changes, but women's stereotypes persisted. Was even the Virgin Mary as passive as the Holy Fathers portrayed her? I felt she must have had a real fire in her soul and certainly a sense of humor. But in the litanies, there was never a reference to Our Lady of Perpetual Laughter, only Our Lady of Perpetual Sorrow. I overcame my earlier resistance to a female therapist when I realized I actually did not trust women and myself as a woman. Not one woman came forth for me, expressed concern for the great female power that I was being asked to deny, keep secret, and give up. I had been outraged by this betrayal by my own sex. Women should have known what real damage they were doing to another woman. It wasn't that impossible to function in society as an unwed mother. Any one of the women that touched my life back then could have shown me another way. Why didn't they? And I think I wanted to call everybody that I knew at that moment, but it was about 2:30 or 3 in the morning, so I chose not to. And I began at that moment to see things in media everywhere. Everywhere I looked, I thought I saw something that had to do with all this. And I brought a couple of these items with me. This is from Glamour magazine, a real feminist magazine, I'm sure. And it's an article called Giving Up a Baby, 6 Women Who Chose Adoption Over Abortion Tell Their Candid Stories. I think it was probably submitted by some people from the right. I could have kept my baby. I was certainly old enough, but I came from a very old-fashioned Italian neighborhood. The baby would have been treated badly because she didn't have a father. Before my daughter was born, I thought watching my mother die of cancer was difficult, but nothing can compare to the first week after you place your child. I was totally listless. I'd sit in front of the television and sob. It was like losing a part of myself. Now, even with that insight, she could only say it was like losing a part of herself. She did lose a part of herself. She lost a part of herself, a part of her family, a part of all of her family's family, but she still didn't see that. Another thing that was in the Los Angeles Times magazine in December, I chose especially for today, because it deals with Honduras and getting babies from Honduras. And I'd like to mention that the contingent from Honduras who facilitates this is represented at our conference. And this is a quote from the adoptive mother who's from the San Francisco area who went down to Honduras. Open adoption laws are looming everywhere in the States, and we don't want an adoption where the mother knows everything about you and you're expected to invite her to Thanksgiving dinner. I don't want to adopt a mother. Hey, you're talking to an insecure person. That's not my idea of a family. I never want to meet the birth mother, and I never want her to see my child. Those folks are here. In 1982, Cub was featured in Woman Wise, and it was written by Carol Anderson, Lee Campbell, and Marianne Cohen. And in 1982, it says, feminists have been slow to recognize adoption's exploitation of their sisters. And I think that nothing has changed about that to me, and I haven't noticed that it has. A lifelong of suffering is too much to demand for any woman's expression of her sexuality. Even if contraception is obtainable, no fertile woman is ever safe from the possibility of unintended pregnancy, since there is no method that is 100% reliable. Even abstinence has its failures since rape exists. So those are just a few of the things that I found since I was working with all of this. And now I sort of feel like I have this gnawing in my center. There are so many people to reach and so much education to be done. I can woke up with my own fire, and it's not stopped. I talk to everyone who will listen to me. Anyone who stops for a moment, I start to talk to them about an adoption issue somewhere. I constantly see an adoption issue in almost every situation I come across. Like there's something that applies to loss or relinquishment or abandonment or something. It's just everywhere. And I kind of see myself as having one foot in the stirrup and one foot still on the ground, and the horse is still kind of walking slowly. But at any moment it's going to break into a gallop, and I'm afraid I'm not going to get up in time, and I just don't know what to do about that. I feel a real urgency that we all need to become real aware. We need to talk to women. We need to be out there. We need to be prepared for the race. And how do we enlighten the feminist organizations we belong to and are connected with? How do we make them understand the ways surrendering our children oppresses women and creates lifelong trauma? Like lifelong trauma, and that's another workshop, I'm sure, down the way. We must establish a forum for dialogue with the feminist community. Society has taught women that their value is to be the mother of her husband's children, to produce heirs for her husband, to sacrifice herself to the care and nurturing of others. If she cannot produce the children to raise and nurture, she needs to find another way to get them. For these children define her life, they justify her existence. In my opinion, this society still looks at childless women in their later years as somehow defective, incomplete, or at least odd, no matter what her other accomplishments have been. As long as this attitude is not altered, or at least challenged by women, an infertile woman will continue to seek children elsewhere and perpetuate the suffering experienced by the source of these children, which is her sisters. Pro-choice is always perceived as only pro-abortion. There are three options available to women experiencing an unplanned pregnancy. Adoption is one of these choices. Therefore, it is crucial that adoption education and reform be a part of the feminist agenda. A woman must always have the freedom to choose the termination of a pregnancy, allow another to raise her child, or birth and raise her child. True freedom of choice can only happen when she is aware of all the benefits and the consequences associated with each choice. If the feminist community fails to recognize that all three choices must be available, they must be destigmatized, and they must be funded, only then can we continue to call ourselves pro-choice. And what do we do about it? That's my dilemma. Where do we go? I was thinking, okay, how do we get to these women's organizations? We're there. We're women. We're involved. We need to speak. We need to talk. We need to let everyone that we come in contact with know of our experiences, either as birth birth mothers, adoptees, people who have heard birth mothers speak or people who have heard adoptees speak. We must educate women. We must educate and talk to prospective women candidates for office and demand that they add this to their agenda and tell them we'll vote for them if they'll do it. We must continue to look at everything that we come across and be willing to just speak up. I've gotten myself kind of a reputation where I work for seeing something, and I work in a university, and if I read something or hear that somebody from the university has been quoted and I feel that our position hasn't been brought up, I call them on the phone. I'm not afraid of anybody. I don't care if they're the chancellor. If he says something I don't like, I just call him up and say, excuse me, I've been left out here. And they listen. I'm very surprised. I thought I would be sort of put in a corner and labeled kind of a crazy person, but they're listening to me and they're willing to listen. And I don't know yet, I haven't seen the evidence that anything is changing, but I know that I'm changing as a result of taking the chance to talk to them. I called, I looked in the yellow pages on our campus, and there's an ad in here for sperm donors in the yellow pages on campus. Well, I didn't like that. I called the people who put together the directory and asked if there was something in here about sperm donors, why wasn't there something about unplanned pregnancy, about adoption, about all of these other issues, that if they're willing to try to get little men to line up and create more little men, why wasn't the other half or something else represented? And they say they'll call me back. But I think we just all need to be willing to do that. So that's where I am. I'm just trying to ask people to be willing to step up and to speak out. And I'm going to have Valerie speak now. Valerie's a marriage and family therapist in private practice, specializing in women's issues, relationships. She's working on a PhD in clinical psychology and hopes to focus on birth mothers' experience of relinquishment for a dissertation. And she's a birth mother, and she's been reunited with her daughter, and very happily so, which is always good to hear. And
thank you.
Turn it over to Valerie.
Let's see if this is going to work. I don't do well with microphones. When I was 17, back in 1958, I had a little girl, and I relinquished her to adoption. And for 31 years, I knew nothing about her. I didn't even know she was alive. I found her last year, and I found a granddaughter, and we are developing a relationship, and it's so precious. But I spent 30 years living in denial, trying so hard to believe what the professionals, the women, the social workers, the church professionals, my family told me to do. They told me things like, you will get over it. You will forget. Pretend it never happened. Get on with your life. You have no right to ever wonder about or ever look for the child that you gave birth to. This is what we were told pretty much across the board, and I might add, these are all lies. But I tried. I did my damnedest to comply with this culturally induced massive denial and repression. I did it for 30 years. Finally, my psyche said enough, enough. For 30 years, if you'd asked me about this, well, not that you would, because you wouldn't have known, not that I would ever tell anyone. We were really coerced into the shame and secrecy of this experience. But I would have said, I've handled it. I've handled it. No, I don't have a right to look for my child. I'm fine. I believed it for 30 years. And finally, my psyche said, enough, enough. And so that's when I began my search. And it's been a very long journey, and I'm still trying to come to terms with the damage that was done to me, and I believe to my child, by this process of adoption. It's why I so strongly believe it's a feminist issue. I want to talk a little bit about some psychological issues for myself and for birth mothers in general. we experience relinquishment as a psychological amputation. It's like losing a part of our soul. We experience PTSD, post-traumatic stress, and all of the very confused dynamics that go along with that. But of course, nobody ever connects this for us. Nobody ever says, you're going to experience some of these things, so we think we're just crazy or dysfunctional or not okay. I've spent 30 years thinking I wasn't okay because part of me was buried. This is the shame. And when you're in a patriarchy that says a woman who has sex and a child that isn't the property of some man, there's a lot of shame that gets dumped on us. Guilt, repressed grief. Since we're going to get over it and get on with our lives so easily, why should we grieve? So it's not honored. Nobody honors it. And there's denial and the fears. Always it was the fear that, well, what if somebody should find out? And then when I had got my voice and started to talk about this, I heard from people who were very well-meaning and cared about me. I never would have known. I never would have known. This is a stereotype. Birth mothers have, and the research bears this out, we have high rates of gynecological problems. Probably, I feel this is a metaphor for the cultural wounding of women. And I think this is true of birth mothers and a lot of other women's issues that are physical. Often we have no more children. There's a very high percentage of what the culture calls secondary infertility. I had a birth mother say, who comes up with these terms? But these are women who don't have any other children. And it's incredibly high. And I think that's indicative of the damage that gets done. High rates of marital problems. These are all part of post-traumatic stress from having gone through this trauma that nobody has recognized or honored. Our voices, our experiences as birth mothers have been buried and ignored by this culture. And it's created, in my opinion, a rupture and profaning of a sacred act and of the mother line. And this is the link between generations of women. And even if I had had a son, he might have had a daughter. And women's voices and women's experiences get lost and buried when birth mothers are made to feel so invisible. There is also the coercion of shame, guilt, and secrecy by what I would term the socializing agents of our culture. These are the families, the mental health and religious professionals, and, as Marty had mentioned, by the women in our lives, our mothers, our families, our friends, acting in service, unconsciously, I think, to the male-oriented values of our society. And this feels like a betrayal at a very, very deep level. Not that I ever had those words until recently, but that's how it's felt. So is adoption a feminist issue? You know, in cultures that respect women and the feminine principle of giving life as sacred, there isn't much adoption, probably not any at all, and abortion is very low because there is a concept of the extended family. You know, women who have children have help and support, and the children always are cared for. We don't have the concept of extended families very well here in this culture. It's the culture of ownership. You know, we have this tight little family, and it's an ownership kind of thing. I feel most blessed that my daughter's adoptive mother has been very, very supportive of my contact with Sue, my daughter, and she sees me as an extended family. And is the world really so small that there isn't room in it for one more person to care? Does it have to be that small? I think the culture tries to make it that way. Adoption is related to the cultural wounding of women, I believe. Infertility, as Marty had said too, a childless woman is made to feel inferior. So there's a desperation for us all to have children. And of course, birth mothers, because we are not the legal property of a man. This culture labels us bad and amoral and labels our children illegitimate. Well, there are no illegitimate children. That is an artificial artifact. It's a patriarchal label. Children always know who their mothers are. What's illegitimate about that? Nothing. But it sets the stage for relinquishment, for seeing adoption as the perfect solution to these poor, infertile women and these depraved birth mothers who we're told don't want our children. It's not that we don't want our children. We are forced to relinquish because we have no support in keeping them. Marilyn French, in her book Beyond Power, says that patriarchy, in order to survive, had to break the natural bond between women and between our children. And I think nowhere is this more evident than with birth mothers, because there has been no support, as you were saying, from other women at this time of a female-specific experience, which is giving birth. And there's culturally induced shame and denial that keeps us from each other. There's this isolation. I spent, I think, 25 years thinking I was the only birth mother in the world. I mean, I knew I wasn't, but I didn't know where they were. And then I met this woman that I really liked. I was living in Modesto at the time, and I felt a real bond with her, and so we became friends. Then I moved away and went back to visit. And I kept getting this urge to talk to her about my daughter. And then I had this other part saying, well, you know what they told you, don't tell anyone, she'll hate you. But I had this strong urge. And so at breakfast one morning, I took a deep breath, and I was so scared. I can't tell you how scared I was. And I told her, the first person I had told about this experience, and she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, the same thing happened to me. She'd relinquished a son. And so we talked nonstop for 24 hours. It's the first contact with a birth mother I had had. We have been so isolated from each other and from the support that we can give each other. And when I decided to search, I went to a conference that was sponsored by Alma. And I found myself in a room with 30 birth mothers. And all of us had the same story and the same feelings and the same pain. And we had been separated from each other. The patriarchy does that. And we need to come together as women, I think, and help each other. The culture creates the famous triple bind, and I want to talk about this because when I think about it, I get so enraged. But this is what happens to all of us who are birth mothers. First, the culture says you are a bad person for having sex, not being married. You are immoral, you are all those names they have for us. However, if you do this wonderful thing of relinquishment, you'll make a couple so happy who can raise your child so much better than you ever could. But it's the best thing for your child. You will be doing something so wonderful for your child if you will relinquish. So we do this thing called relinquishment, and sometimes before the ink is dry in the papers we hear, how can any woman give up her child? You must be a monster. This is a triple bind. And you know, in family systems, this happens a lot, this dynamic, and we call it child abuse. It's crazy-making behavior, and this is what the culture does, acting as a larger dysfunctional parent to birth mothers. I personally call it attempted soul murder, because the culture is very toxic. It creates the either-or mentality, the ownership of children. There can only be one set of parents, and the reality is for adoptees, they have two. And everybody's real. Everyone's real. This is the reality that the culture has tried to deny for birth mothers and adoptees. And the brutality, I think, extends to our children. I think, and I base this on so many new in utero studies. They're studying the fetus and looking at the things that affect a child in utero. And I believe that the shattering of the mother-child bond, when a woman is planning to relinquish and going through the stress and the pain and the grief and the coercion, knowing that she can't keep her child, is communicated to the child at some very deep level. And the research on adoptees has shown that they are highly represented among those with psychological problems as adolescents, learning disabilities. They're stigmatized by the false label of illegitimacy. They often experience deep-seated abandonment issues and genealogical bewilderment and the not fitting in. I believe it's related to how birth mothers are treated when we're carrying our children. And I believe, and this is my personal feeling, and it gives me tremendous pain, because I believe what I had to do in order to relinquish my child, to just block and numb in order to survive myself, probably wounded my child. I feel great guilt about that, and it's a wound I'll take with me to my grave. And no amount of therapizing or intellectualizing or rationalizing will ever take that away totally. And I believe this kind of pain, that experienced by birth mothers and our children, needs to be a feminist issue. I think the community of women needs to know about this. We, as Marty says, she speaks to everyone. I try to do that too. I mean, I've had no voice about this for 30 years. Now I speak to any chance I get. Because in hearing our voices and hearing our experiences and honoring women's experiences, even those that have been labeled as bad and immoral, we really weren't, you know. Never were. It can give a larger picture of myriad ways in which this culture hurts women, and in doing so hurts our children. I think it's a very, very important issue for feminists or anyone who cares about women and children to really be involved in. So when you hear the word adoption, I have so many friends, therapists who, they work with clients, they've been adopted, they've been birth mothers, and they think nothing of it. Well, after talking to me, they think twice about what is this really saying. So that's my part here, and I want to pass this on to Kendra.
I'm the adoptee in the triangle, and I'm not sure what I'm going to say because I'm still in the process of searching and figuring out how I feel about everything. So while Marty and Valerie have been talking, I've been very nervous about what I'm going to share because I'm not sure what feminist issues can result from this. I'm 23 years old, and I was adopted at 4.5, 5 weeks, I believe. My birth parents, all I know about my father is that he was a black man. That's good start. My birth mother was 19 years old at the time, and she was white female, went to college, and her father was the dean at the university that she went to in one of the departments or schools, I'm not sure which. And I was very lucky to be adopted into a family where my father was black and my mother was white, very similar situation, with two older brothers that were the natural children of my adopted parents. And it was a very open situation. I grew up knowing that I was adopted. My mother would always say, you might not have grown in my stomach, but you grew in my heart. And even though I was really little, I didn't know what that meant. But when the time came and I started asking questions, well, what does that mean? My mother would take me and we'd go into my special file and we'd open up the adoption, the description of my parents. And so that was very special. And I believe it fostered a lot of trust between my mother and I. So whenever, once a year, every 6 months, whenever I had a question, she'd, open up the file and we'd talk about it. And she said it doesn't mean that she didn't love you. She thought it was the best thing for you. And let's see. The main thing I want to get across is that I think my whole life is a search. I have something inside of me that's a very big void, and I'm just coming to terms with this. And I'm wondering if it will ever be filled. My adoptive father died when I was 8, and my adoptive brother, my oldest brother, died when I was 16. Sorry. I'm the emotional one before, sorry. Let's see.
I've got Kleenex if you need it, because I cry too when I talk about this.
Oops. Okay. Also, being interracial was also a very big question of identity, which all teenagers go through. It was even more so with me because my brothers looked alike and I might have had the same coloring as them, but I wanted to know what, my parents looked like, and which is very natural. And my mother dealt with it as best as she could. I went off to college at 18, and that's when I decided, this has got to stop. I have to find out. I have to find these people. And my mother was very supportive of me. I felt like I had to tell her. It was very important for me to share this with her, and she was very open about it. But I did feel like I had to get her permission to start this search. And the first thing I did was write the adoption agency and said, I want to know everything. Tell me everything. What they sent back was, first you have to prove who you are. Send us a copy of your driver's license. And second, they said, here it is. Here's the little non-identifying information. And it turned out to be less than what my parents had in the file, which I found very interesting. And they enclosed the Massachusetts state law on what the adoptee had the right to know. And at that point, I was determined to do it on my own no matter what. I was going to go through the mail. I was going to fly out from California to Massachusetts. But for somebody to tell me that I had no right to know where I come from, I know in my heart that that wasn't right. And so that was a major thing. Fighting the system was very important to me. And I think I got wrapped up in fighting the system more so than dealing with my feelings of what's going to happen in the long run, this and that. Friends were very supportive. It was something of an oddity. I met other adoptees who would say, oh yeah, I've had a lot of questions, I've often wondered about them, but there's no way I could ever look, I could ever search for these people because my family would not allow it or they wouldn't accept it. So I know many adoptees feel that that adoptive unit is the only family they can ever have. Their parents would not understand a relationship with the birth parents. I was lucky and my mother is very supportive, or she's trying to be very supportive. She has some doubts sometimes, I think. When I found my birth mother through lots of searching on my own, I flew out there and searched and consequently found her. Found out her name, found a picture of her, sent away for a picture of her, got all of my medical records. That was wonderful from my birth. So I did a lot on my own. And then I had to put it aside. I went to Spain for a year and I decided to put the search aside. And at that point I wrote into the court and I wrote into the 2 adoption agencies that were involved and gave them waivers of confidentiality, and I petitioned the court of Boston to open my files. And when I was in Spain, they opened my files because I gave them all the information: my birth mother's name, my birth name, which I found in my file by accident, and I said, this is who I am, this is who I was born as, this is my birth mother's name, I was adopted by these people, please open my file, and they did it. And it was the biggest feeling of accomplishment that I could ever feel. But after that point, then came the reality. Okay, now I have to deal with my feelings. Who are these people? What do they mean to me? And last December, thanks to some help with Marty and my boyfriend, we found out where my birth mother is. And I wrote her a letter saying, you know, basically I'd like to get together and fit the pieces of the puzzle together, and because I was ready at that point to expand, and she hasn't contacted me, and we found out a few things about her, and I hope she's dealing with it, but I still feel that I'm going up against, I'm always trying to please people. I don't want to hurt anybody, and I didn't play by the rules searching. And that made me feel good, but I'm still playing by rules. You know, I'm trying not to hurt my adoptive mother. I'm trying to satisfy the birth parents by keeping distance. And knowing who they are, knowing who my birth mother is a great feeling, but I still don't know the truth about what happened, why I'm here, and who those people are. And I think I will always be searching to satisfy something in myself. I spoke to a psychologist a few years ago, and something else that Valerie mentioned, the sense of abandonment. My adoption, compounded with what happened in my life, really affects me, and I will always have problems with people leaving me. And searching and trying to satisfy, I think I'm going to be going through for a very long time. That's all.
Well, I want to say a little bit about Betty before she speaks, because I have all these wonderful things to say. So, I met Betty about a year ago. She spoke at a meeting that I attended, and after the meeting, I went up and I don't even remember what I said. Something about enjoying what she said, and I think I had my little hanger on, my pro-choice hanger, and she commented on it, and I said, well, this hanger is resulting in me losing my job. And she just stopped in the middle of her conversation about what she was talking about and just looked at me and she said, you fight. You take your power. And it really, really did empower me. And as a result of that, I gave her a call one day and said I wanted to speak with her, and she made time for me and drove down from North LA and down to Laguna Beach, and we had brunch. And she shared with me some things that she's done in her life and that she's doing. Told me about the feminist forum that she started in LA at the ACLU and invited me to attend that, which I have pretty much every month since then. Her background is so, I mean, there's lists and lists and lists. She's been the co-director of Women's Studies program at Cal State University at Long Beach. She's a PhD from the Institute of Advanced Study of Human Sexuality in San Francisco. She's been awarded the Most Outstanding Award for contributing to women's liberation. I think she's pretty qualified to speak from a feminist perspective. She's not a birth mother, but she's sort of an honorary birth mother because she's listened to me for almost the last year, and like I say, I don't shut up. Almost every time we get together, I somehow bring it up one way or another, and we're real honored that she took time from her day to be here with us. So she does work with pregnant teens in the public school system, so she has a unique perspective about what's happening today, or I feel probably what's not happening today. So I'm going to turn that over to Betty.
Thanks, Marty. I guess when you said fight, that's exactly what I'd like to say to you today. I'm in a school, and I'll tell you where I am. I'm in the Los Angeles School District at McAllister High School, which is a part of the continuation schools of the Unified School District to take care of the problem of dropouts. They want the money that they would get from these girls that would drop out, and in a way it's great. I mean, I suppose things are nothing more than paradoxes anyway. You know, they're good and bad intentions with everything. I got to this school because I fought the university over the whole issue of choice around women having a right to decide their own sexuality. So as I sit here today, I need to tell you that I am a street fighter. I teach street fighting, and I teach people how to do that, and in addition to that, I think you ought to fight whenever possible. Now, you don't have to just do an upfront fight. You can do exactly like Kendra's doing. The problem is we don't feel good about those fights. So I guess what I want to say is what I'm seeing in the public schools where I am are girls being pressured. And the big pressure in our culture comes directly from certain precepts that you've talked about in the patriarchy, and that is, number one, women don't have the right to the products of their body. Those are supposed to be destroyed or placed somewhere. The big problem, it seems to me, that we have in the culture is the fact that women can't make choices. You can't decide to have an abortion. Somebody's walking in and say, oh no, you're going to kill life, and yet all the patriarchy does is murder and kill life. They call people bastards. They call people names. They call lesbians and gay women. They call anybody who is different from what they want people to be names. And what that does is, yes, it scars us. It beats us up. The problem is, how do we fight them? I'm sitting now with girls in my classroom who are struggling to decide what they're going to do with their babies. They have mothers and fathers who said, we're kicking you out of the house if you come home with this child. So who are the agencies that are going to pick up these babies? That's the problem, I think. I do have to say that I come right out with where I am. I have not been a friend of the Catholic Church. I admire all the folks who left the Catholic Church because most of these people are revolutionaries and they tend to be incredible feminists. Although within the church there are marvelous, marvelous feminists who are reformist feminists, and they're working to change a lot of this stuff. I also have to say that I am deeply, deeply grateful for the Holy Family services that are across the street at St. Anne's Maternity Home from us, because of the fact that they are trying to do, they think, what is best for the young woman. They are not out like some of the abortion agencies leeching off of these young women. They are at least attempting to give them some kind of an option. These girls, by the time they get to us, have decided to have these babies. They are not going to go through an abortion. So what's next? For many of them, they do not have supportive families. We do not have a society, and that's the area where I would hope that our movement, the feminist movement, would pick it up. We don't have a society that is dedicated to putting any funding into funding mothering. The only funding they want to put up is to blow up missiles and to promote certain kinds of economic ideas that do not benefit women, okay? And I think that's where the big fight is going to come. I made a statement in my classroom, I don't think a young woman ought to ever have to give up a baby. Well, a young woman walked up to me and she said, I won't take a class with you. I will not take a class with you because you're against adoption. And I had to think, oh God, what have I done? Because what I was trying to say in that classroom was, I really want to support you. If you've decided to have this child, then you shouldn't have to give this child up. For whatever reason, I had found myself having to look at that issue. all over because this child who walked, this woman, and I don't call them children, I try to respect them as women, walked up and said, you're against what I'm trying to do. And I thought, well, Betty, you've got to tiptoe through this minefield a little bit better than this. And I said to you, what I really am trying to say is I want to be on your side. What you decide is real important. But there are areas here that some of us know about that you're going to look for that child for the rest of your life if there's not some kind of open adoption in some way for you to be supported with that.
This is the end of side A. Please turn your tape over and continue on side B.
And so I got a few lists, and of course they're adoption agencies. And I said, oh, that's interesting. I said, but they're adoption agencies, which in fact means that they're in the business of adoption, which in fact means that they don't have adoptions, that they'll be out of business. So obviously, I was trying to make the social worker see through the line. And she said, yeah, I thought about that. I said, so when they get there, do they just get that point of view, or is there a way that they can get another point of view, say from perhaps a birth mother that has gone through this? Like that. And this is a young social worker, and it is a problem of the young social workers today who think they're educated in the colleges and they've gotten all the didactics, but it doesn't do anything for the female. So she did invite me back to do something about it. And so that's kind of, I guess, where I am. You can put your name on all this too, is what she said. Or come back and give us some in-service.
Yeah, so what that means basically is that it sounds to me you've got your mandate, woman date. And that woman date is that you all are on the edge. You're the radicals. You have to go into every one of the... I always felt like Planned Parenthood was very liberal to conservative. As a feminist, I can tell you they're very liberal and conservative. They are not on the edge. If you're going to do on the edge work, you're going in and taking on those institutions. You need to hit every Protestant church, every liberal Catholic group that you can hit. You need to hit the Muslims. You need to hit the Baha'is. You need to hit every institution in the culture. Because what you're in the process of doing now, it sounds to me like, is that you're in the process of getting the word out that there is another way that's been secret and hidden and terribly damaging to people. And you're the revolutionaries. You're it.
It's scary because I'm really not out of the closet in my work.
That's the way life is. That's what does Since when did anybody in here ever get their life totally in order in order to go do something? Raise your hand. See, the problem is we all think, well, if I just get it done tomorrow, if I'm just better than so and so, you're never going to be there. And in fact, the wonderful thing about you can stand up and say, I'm a total mess, but this is wrong.
I can do that part.
Yeah.
What I found absolutely appalling, I work in an agency which has an adoption department, and we also have a family service department. And I said, well, what do you do, I asked, with the women who come in who haven't made a decision? Well, we send them to one of the birth mother counselors, and there they explore options. And I knew that the birth mother counselor with whom I shared the office was real good. But these poor girls, we moved to new offices, and now we have signs by every department. And the birth mother counselor sits in the adoption department. But the family service workers who do therapy don't know the first thing about adoption. I was flabbergasted to find out that schools of social work in this country do not provide courses on adoption issues. We have interns in our agency now, and one of them came in, and she's in the adoption department. And I said, well, what courses have you taken? What books have you read on adoption? She said, none. I said, how? She goes to Columbia, the pinnacle of social work education. Well, she has a social work education in adoption now because I gave it to her. But I am appalled, and I think maybe we need to work through the schools of social work also and say you must educate your students as to these issues.
There's a book out of the school, University of Michigan School of Social Work called Helping Women Cope with Grief, and actually Cub has it on their literature list. And it was written in 1981, so it's 10 years old. And in there is a whole chapter on birth mothers. And it's wonderful. Phyllis Silverman. It's an absolutely wonderful publication. I don't know why other schools of social work don't know about it, and I think it's far too expensive for its importance. I mean, it's
Well,
it's a
Marty,
very
see,
little-
what you all do is that you challenge the whole basis of patriarchal law. Do you realize what it means to say, I get to keep this child simply because I'm the birth mother? You realize how radical that is? I mean, you have to understand how deep this goes. They do not wish that. And even the people, and if anybody's a Right to Life or challenge me in here, the Right to Life people want those babies kept in patriarchal families. I haven't seen any Right to Life people who are going out forming circles of support for birth mothers. Have you?
Yeah.
Okay, tell me about them.
Okay, there's this woman in Idaho. We corresponded for a while because I liked the fact that she supported women. She found families that would house women, sort of like Marty did. Although I found out that she really wanted just heterosexual married families.
Well, that's patriarchal then, that's my point.
Well, yes, patriarchal, but I thought you said, do they support women? They did support women to keep the child, not only to relinquish. But as long as they weren't having an abortion is what that was her thing. In other words, I couldn't align
But
with
that's
her.
very heterosexist and very heterosexual, and she was putting it, probably wanting a religious group too.
Yes.
There's,
So maybe
and you know,
that's-
you are challenging, if you really take this radical idea, you are saying to men, the woman has the right to make these decisions. That is the challenge of a patriarchal civilization at the core.
If all women are encouraged and able to keep their children, what happens to the infertile women? Some feminists seem that they shouldn't be neglected.
Well, I just think that the infertile people, that's just a gift of life, and you get to go work with folks that have babies. And there are plenty. I mean, what if you say we have to take care and make these things a property right, which is what I hear from Marty, right? And you all might want to comment on that. Ownership is the problem.
Ownership.
American Indian culture is the only culture besides black culture that I've really seen do this. American Indian culture takes babies in right and left. Certain Indian tribes, they just don't do like Western European cultures. And this sounds racist, but black culture, they don't have any money, but by golly, they keep those babies. So the whole issue here has to do with a middle class, an upper class legal system that's got to be broken, and the only way that any of that ever gets broken is radicals who break it.
You also can work with somebody who brings that argument about what about infertile women. You have to separate infertility from unplanned pregnancy. One is not a cure for the other. And they don't want to hear that.
Right.
But that's the bottom line. It is not a cure, and it's a medical condition, and it's sad, and so are a lot of medical conditions. And they certainly have our empathy, but they can't have our babies.
And there will always be children who may be home.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, you separate.
The lists are endless.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about all those homes where children are sent? There are millions of kids who are out there. Well, what about that issue? What about that answer to that? Why not go to an orphanage and
And if that doesn't satisfy them, you challenge them as to why they feel they have to have an infant. Is that parenting, or is that ownership? And then you make them real uncomfortable, but they get it. Or they may not get it, but they got it from you. You know, and you feel better about it.
I do think there's a time in a woman's life where you want a baby. I'm a lesbian woman, but I can tell you, when I got to be 33, I wanted a baby so bad. Every time babies would go by, my head that way, this way, and I thought, what's wrong with me? I've never wanted babies. I can't stand babies. I can't stand them. I don't want to be around. Every time one went by, you know. What is that? I don't know. Juices inside or something. I don't know what that is. But they're some god-awful thing.
Hormonal changes.
God is helping them.
Yeah, but I think it's wonderful. I think children are wonderful, but I do think we have to look at the ownership stuff, and we have to look at how they divided it all up. And I think it's hard.
Excuse me. It's Phyllis Chesler's Sacred Bond that you may have read.
Yeah, it's very good.
She, that's one book in which a feminist talks about.
Yeah.
The bond between mother and child is sacred, but in our society we think the legal contract, the
Is
subtitle was
more
about
it's
the
more
legacy of
sacred.
baby, and we think the legal contract is sacred, but that is the patriarchy does. And it's really good. She really tears the whole system apart.
Yes, she does.
I came in late, and I just have another question, and perhaps you'd answer this. The definition of feminist?
Definitely. Any of you all want to take it on? You want me?
No, I wouldn't.
I feel like
With you in the room,
every time
I
I
wouldn't
speak
touch
a little
that.
bit. I feel like I'm sitting out here. I can't. You want to say what you think feminist is, or
Well, I have a quote,
okay?
because I wrote it down because it's how I feel. A feminist is a person who favors political, economic, and social equality of women and men, and therefore favors the legal and social changes, Betty would say fights for, and I totally agree, not just favors, the changes that will be necessary to achieve that equality. And I think that's what that means is, since we've had such an unbalanced culture of the male values being seen as norm and anything else being seen as bullshit, women need to learn to honor our own and value what we feel and what we believe and what our experiences are, because it's not balanced. It's very inharmonious, and that needs to be brought out, fought for, and believed in.
You go further to the radical side, and there are those who say that male culture is so damaged, you cannot have an equal situation, therefore you have to separate from them and build a whole new system. And there are those who say that the matriarchy must subsume the patriarchy because the patriarchy is so toxic. Okay, that's a more radical, that would move you further in a radical stance. In general, in the political arena, it is an attempt to take those laws that are so hierarchical and damaging, primarily sexist laws, and I think that feminists are in favor of trying to work on racial issues and class issues too, because I think once you try to take that system down, then you have to do that, but that's another point of view.
Well, equality of human beings would include classes and races.
Yeah.
That would all be included in that. And it's so important, because I personally believe, and very strongly, that unless this occurs, our planet's doomed, and all of us on it. I think that what we're doing to the earth is very related to what this culture does to women. It's the ecofeminism movement, but it's all related. And we, I think, are charged with, because we are aware, we're here, with some responsibility for doing something about it. And all we can do is what we can do, each one of us, but I think each one of us can definitely make a difference. And we have ripple effects. Just one person planting a seed with the speaking out can reach other people without maybe us even seeing where it goes. But we need to speak out. And if we don't value ourselves, the culture doesn't. We have to do it in spite of what the culture says. And I think that's for all women everywhere. I think that's, for me, what feminism is all about.
The other thing I think feminism is all about is building small groups to make it a group effort. And Marty pulled me in on this stuff. You can't stand on that tip alone. You've got to have people with you, unless you do have such a height of an alligator that, you can stand it. But it's very difficult unless you got some kind of a support system. And that's the other thing, is that women's support groups doing exactly what you're talking about and bouncing ideas off of one another and hearing each other's voices, everybody speaking, valuing that spoken thing, because one of the things patriarchy tries to do is silence women. They don't want to hear you talk or hear anybody here. I mean, after all.
I have to say, I went to the first, at Betty's invitation, the first Model C group that I attended. It wasn't the first one, but the first one I went to. And yeah, it was at the ACLU. I think just being in the ACLU kind of made me feel like I was coming out of something. And in LA. I don't know how to drive in LA. I didn't know how to even get there, and I looked it up on the map by myself, and that also made me feel very good. And I drove there all by myself. And I sat around this large round table and listened to all these women speak. And when it was my turn to speak, that is exactly when I said what I said. I've been afraid to say that I was a feminist. And I know now it's time for me to do that. And I shared why about being a birth mother. Now, I didn't know any of these women in the room except Betty, and I only knew her once. I only met her once. And I talked about my experience very briefly, and then went around the room, because we always do feminist process, it goes round and round and round. And the next time around, there were so many women. There were about 30 women there, and I don't think one woman passed without saying something about my issue. They got it. They cried. The women who were also mothers just almost fell apart. Now, these were very aware feminist women who had never heard this before. And I've since become aligned with the group, and I show up all the time, and And they say almost every time, Marty, you know, if it wasn't for what you said that day, I would never have seen this stuff. And I see it everywhere. I see it in the newspaper. I hear it on TV, and I speak out. Now that's 30 women, by just saying that, who are out there speaking out on our behalf. And I know that it's powerful. And another thing happened that day is one of the women, who I've not seen since, came up to me and passed me a note, actually, that said, "Call me." And then after I got this note, we went around the room again, and she just sat there and said, "I'm a birth mother, and I've never told anybody." And she, you know, said a little bit about it, and this woman who passed me this note that said, you know, "Call me, I need to talk to somebody." So you not only can you help people go out and spread the word, you never know when one of us is in the room that needs to hear somebody else say it for the first time.
I had the same story as you in the center. After I had come out of the closet and told my immediate, my children, my husband always knew that I'm a birth mother, then went to the grandparents, and I told all family members, okay, I said, now it's time to tell your friends and your coworkers. So one day a friend just called me, I forgot what, something simple, and I said, okay, this is going to be the first one. I just happened to pick her because she called me. My heart is pounding like anything, and I told my story, and it was silence. I thought, oh my God, you know, she's going to be terrible. She didn't talk for a long time, and then she said, the same thing happened to me. This is the first person I decided to tell. And it was only coincidence that she happened to pick up the phone the day I was ready, so that they are out there.
Yeah. Where did we all think these children, we all ran into adopted parents and adopted children, and it's like we all forgot that they had to come from them.
Yeah.
That's what I
And
found.
we disappeared.
I just wanted to share, I'm a writer and I was looking for a women's writers group to attend, and I saw one advertised in this feminist newspaper. The first meeting was 4 women, and we were all in a triangle. The fourth was a sibling of an adoptee. Wow. Just, you know, out of 4, just out of nowhere.
Sample of 4.
I was just going to say, before I met Marty, growing up I met lots of adoptees, and we talk about it, and we go, oh yeah, I'm adopted too, isn't that funny, ha ha ha. And my mother would talk about it to other people. She'd forget sometimes that I was adopted, but then she'd remember. But until I met Marty and the other people, you know, at the meetings, that I did not realize that, yeah, you don't go around and say, oh yeah, I'm a birth mother. You don't hear that. And to realize that that you don't come out, I just can't imagine. You know, I'm glad that my eyes have been opened, and I'm trying to understand what my birth mother might be going through right now. But I just think it's amazing. I wonder.
Anybody else have anything? I have a little quote from Marilyn, also from Marilyn French, that I just kind of a fiery thing in a sweet sort of way. She just says, I regularly say feminist is the only revolution that asks its adherents to live, not die for it, to enjoy and not suffer for it. So I think that this doesn't have to be a painful process. I think it's very empowering to tell our stories. We have nothing to be ashamed of. I confessed, I'm sure people at work would have considered a confession to this man down the hall who just adopted the baby, that I was a birth mother, and he didn't know how to take it. It made him real uncomfortable. And at the end of our conversation, he just looked at me and he thought he was being nice, and he said, well, I would have never known. And I just looked at him. I thought, that I could have been offended by that, and I just smiled at him. I said, ever since they let us clean our foreheads, and I walked out.
That's great.
So it can be fun.
Yeah, I want to invite any of you that are in this area this Sunday. I'm sure you're down here, but 5 to 8 we have a Model C group at the ACLU, and if you want to, I won't be home until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll be there from 2 to about 3:30, and then I'll go down to the group. My number is 213-861-1600. And I want to challenge everybody to go out and be as absolutely idiotic as folks who stand on the corner selling Awakening. It's almost like we've got to be that sort of. And if we can do that sort of, then Marty's one. She just bugs me all the time. You know, there's no way I can get away from this stuff. But that's the way it's going to have to be, because you're radicals. You're radicals. Whether you like it or not, or whether we like it or not, you know. I think this problem probably is as prevalent as the rape issue. I mean, I remember Susan McGreevy, who got me into fighting this lawsuit that I fought. She said, Betty, you got to look at these issues, this underbelly of the patriarchy, the stuff that they shove down and they force women to cry and to be so miserable over. Marty's right, we need to laugh in their face. I think that's a wonderful comeback, maybe some verbal karate when they say little things like that to you, you know, if we could figure out some ways, because what happens is that stuff goes in our heart because we take it in. And we're so beautiful. We need to bounce it back, just, you know, just like playing a game with them, and just bounce it right back, and their little testicles go all the way up, and they, you know. Because we take the pain of the world. Sisters, we don't need to take any more pain. We got enough. You know, we need to love and laugh and have a good time. And I want to thank you, Marty, for asking me to come down here.
We're done.
Thank you for coming.
This concludes this session.